You're an agribusiness executive navigating an increasingly competitive market while trying to grow your company. Mergers and acquisitions are pitched as an accelerant to growth, but many M&A deals destroy more value than they create. Welcome to the Pacesetter Pod, where we explore and reveal the perspectives, insights, and approaches for successful mergers and acquisitions. Here's your host, the Integration Pacesetter, Joe Mosier.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Pacesetter Pod. I'm your host, Joe Mosier. For those of you that are regular listeners to the show, you might recall that a couple weeks back we did an episode about a designation framework for biological products and product selection and how that could be repurposed to help you make better decisions about where to focus people, time, money, all in pursuit of advancing your strategy within your agribusiness. And this drove me to think about and recall that sometimes there's more information required to make those decisions. And it occurred to me that perhaps in my enthusiasm for the requirements and criteria model that we talked about in episode 61, in case you missed it, that enthusiasm may have gotten away from me, and I might have oversimplified the reality of what that decision-making process is. So what am I saying here? To put it as simply as I can, once you know that you're only looking at projects, investments, change levers, etc., that are strategically aligned to where you're trying to take your business, then how do you make the right decision about which ones to pursue? So this is a process of down selection. We've got a strategy, we've got a vision for the company, we have a plethora of different opportunities that may advance that strategy, and how do we constantly down select? And at this point, you've selected now to that handful that are strategically aligned, meaning they offer material value to advancing the company's strategy, but you still have to make decisions because you have finite resources, time, people, etc. And so really, when we think about that requirements and criteria model back in episode 61, the question then that struck me was, well, how do we really operationalize that criteria aspect where businesses, leadership teams, yourself sit down and say, okay, of this group of strategically aligned opportunities, which ones are we actually going to focus on and do? Now, for any of you who have worked in or with or around a portfolio management office or a project management office, they're commonly called PMOs, you'll know they have some defined requirements for the execution of a project, some things that help you decide what to do, which projects to do rather, and you'll be familiar with the term, project charter. And depending on your experience, that me saying those words together, project and charter, might inspire either a little bit of recognition. Yeah, that's familiar. Maybe for a few of you, there's some energy, excitement, but I'm going to guess that for many of you, you might actually be running for the door or looking to no longer listen to the rest of this episode. And I'd encourage you just to hang in there a little bit longer. Today, I want to extend the discussion from episode 61 and talk about how you can use a simplified version of a charter as a tool in that process of down selecting which opportunities to pursue based on what's the value potential that's offered and how you manage that with the limited people and resources that you have available. So let's jump in. First, let's take an example. Let's imagine for a moment a seed business that is using the requirements and criteria approach that we previously talked about. This fictional organization has really cemented three primary requirements using this model. The first requirement is projects or investments have to defend our existing territory by meeting more needs of our existing customers, meaning we're going to enrich our relationships with our existing customer base. We're going to keep them happy by offering more comprehensive products and services that meet their needs. The second is that all opportunities will ideally help or at least not hinder the company's efforts to digitize how they operate. And this includes digitizing not only their internal systems and processes and certificates of inspection and files and documents, et cetera, but also digitizing how they interact with third parties, whether it's their seed producers, their tollers that do their offsite cleaning and bagging and packaging, their dealers, their farmer customers, et cetera. And then the third requirement in this fictional example is the projects have to contribute to a product portfolio of higher value add and less commoditized offerings. This company already differentiates on service, and they really see growth through higher margin product sales as where they're trying to go. So they've got these 3 requirements, and then below them, they would have a number of criteria. And we're not going to hypothesize or speculate on what that criteria would be today, but you can imagine a few different things that might go into there. So after they think about this, and they're now looking at a number of specific opportunities that have been brought forward from across the company. So when you say, okay, here's our strategy, and we need to think about what opportunities we're going to pursue. Typically, companies have a campaign where employees are encouraged to bring ideas forward. This company has collected, several dozen different opportunities, and they came from the sales teams, they came from the marketing teams, they came from the folks that work on the production side of the business with their growers, from internal operations, from quality, from the information technology group, et cetera, et cetera. And they're all there, and they all ostensibly advance the strategy. And so now the question is, of course, how do we decide? We've got, let's say, roughly 20 to 30 different options in front of us. Now, to make the decisions in a formal way, where the strength of a potential project is not judged by the skilled showmanship or the positional authority of the person who's advocating for it, companies tend to want to collect certain project information. They want to have a standard set of facts on each project that'll help them make those decisions. And that information usually shows up in a project charter. So let's stop here for a moment and talk about what is a project charter. A workable definition of a charter is a document that's going to define all of a project's, its purpose, scope, stakeholders, objectives, the end-to-end plan to execute the work. It likely talks about what work will be done, when it's going to be done, who's going to do it, what risks to manage, what communications need to be sent, how you're going to manage the change, how you're going to retain documents and get approvals, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And it really codifies what the project will and won't do. It'll also specify who has the authority over the project, what the budget for the effort is, and so on. So it's immensely valuable through the eyes of the project. The challenge is that this well-intentioned effort often becomes antagonistic to the folks that just want to run the business and win. And it's antagonistic, in my view, because what it does is it highlights the competing priorities. You have project managers that have been trained to develop charters, and they want an airtight project charter to help them define what they're accountable for delivering and what the time, people, resources, etc., are going to be made available to them. Who wouldn't want that if you're taking on a large project? Who wouldn't want that clarity? But because this work is episodic, meaning it's a project that's going to have a beginning and an end, the PM works hard for that clarity and tends to, and these processes encourage them to, collect a lot of information. For everybody else outside of that project manager or that core project team, the project charter is felt like we're doing too much work talking about the project rather than just doing the project. And we've been told that doing this project helps the business. Let's just go do it. And so this tension emerges between them. Project charters are meant to create clarity, but often they just accumulate criticism and scar tissue and resistance. And it is because you have competing priorities around what level of clarity, what level of information, what level of detail meets the needs that you have. The other problem here is that oftentimes the project charter is being developed by project teams on the assumption that the project is going to be pursued. But if we go back to what we're talking about today, we're trying to talk about how do you get the right information about a project, about an investment opportunity, whatever it might be. How do you get the right information so that leadership can make an informed decision about which ones they want to say yes to? So it's threading the needle. We want standard information on all these projects so we make the best decision, but we don't want to really struggle and ultimately collapse under the weight of all the effort that's required to get all the possible information. So that brings us to the point today. What can be done about this? Now, early in my career, I had the privilege of working with and really learning from a seasoned process improvement veteran, a guy who was a Six Sigma black belt, had led dozens, perhaps hundreds of Kaizen events. I mean, really well steeped in the technicalities and the mechanics of running robust process improvement initiatives in the businesses in a variety of different industries. And he showed us a simpler way to use charters to define the opportunities that we're talking about and then vet those options without that grueling effort of building these huge, robust charters that really result in suffocating many of the projects that we'd otherwise want to do.
Poorly executed mergers and acquisitions destroy more value than they create. They can set your company back years. To defend your firm's position in the marketplace, you need access to the leading practices that unlock the greater potential of your people, processes, and systems. If you are undertaking a company transformation or pursuing an acquisition as a vehicle to grow, set up a call with Joe by visiting www.moshercg.com.
So back then, we affectionately called it the Charter Light. And it was a document that captures just enough information to help decision makers understand the project and make a decision without gathering so much information that you effectively start the project before you decide whether or not you should do anything about the project at all. So here was the magic, and this is important. There's three main attributes from my recollection. The first was the Charter Light had to answer 6 questions. And we're going to talk about what those are in a moment, but that was key. It answers these questions, not 5, not 7. These are the 6 questions we want answered. The Charter Light had to fit on one slide, which in and of itself is a pretty Herculean effort. And then we had a template available that provided a space to address each one of the 6 questions. And the Charter Light had to have, I believe it was either a 14, maybe even a 16-point font minimum. I forget the precise number, but it was really important. This was checked because one of the ways that you can get around answering everything on one slide is, of course, to go to progressively smaller and smaller fonts to make it all fit. And that was monitored and governed, and it was really pushing the folks that put these together to be as precise and as straightforward with their wording and with the information as possible. The Charter Light really provided a vehicle for advocates of a project to tell the story of the project, but also encumbered them with the duty to tell the story in that standard way. So what were those 6 questions that I mentioned earlier? The first was, what problem are you trying to solve? This was where, in a very straightforward, simple way, state the problem, quantify what it is, and make sure that we know clearly where the pain is being felt in the business. Was it, we're not offering XYZ product or service, therefore we're missing a market, we're limiting our partnership with a potential customer or an existing customer? Was it something that was causing quality defects in the plant? Was it a process, a pain point that was resulting in poor order fulfillment statistics? Whatever it might have been. What problem are you trying to solve? Quantify it, and where's the pain being felt? The second question is, what's the value of solving the problem? And this is where we had to pencil out what might be the benefits that we expect. So we reduce out-of-spec products at the plant. So what? What sort of rework costs are we currently incurring that we could be reducing? What are the returns from customers, the recalls, et cetera, that we could then mitigate? What is the packaging savings, perhaps? Whatever it might be, you had to specify the value of solving that project. What is the felt benefit back to the organization when this is done? The third question is getting into the details of what are you explicitly solving and not solving. So this is the scope question. So let's use this example again of off-spec product at the warehouse. You might say, we are solving this specifically within our own packaging facilities. We are out of scope is looking at third-party tolling locations that might be doing packaging on our behalf. Or we're looking at this specifically for our large conventional row crop products and not for specialty or veg seed or cover crops, for example. Things of that nature. So you really get specific around what is in or out of scope. The fourth question is, who needs to be involved in solving the problem? This is where they would specify out who's the core project team. Now, I'll come back in a few minutes about how this evolves over time, but this was specifying specifically either who or what functions had to be represented, because they would help leadership start to understand, now that they know what we're trying to solve, what's the value of solving it, what's in and out of scope. Now they start to get a sense of, okay, how complex is this from an interdepartmental standpoint? How many people are we talking about? What people might we be talking about? Number 5 then is, how long is it going to take you to solve the problem? This was the projected schedule. Is this a 6 to 8 week sprint? Is this a 6-month project, or is this going to be multiple years spanning multiple budget cycles? And talking in general terms around what is driving that projection on schedule. So this is not a detailed Gantt chart. It's not a detailed work plan. It's a general estimation of how big from a duration standpoint is this particular project. And the last question was, what do you need to solve this problem? This is where we challenged folks to put down, if you need a budget, if this is a capital investment effort, what do we think the swag estimate of that spend is going to be? Do you need development resources from IT to be writing code, to be vetting third-party solutions, whatever it might be? Do you need other third-party services involved, consultants, et cetera? We talked about the people in the previous question 4 of who needs to be involved. But then here we talk about, is that dedicated? Meaning, are we putting someone 100% on this project for a period of time? Or is it fractional? So you start to marry together the people involved, the budget, the duration, and how much their time is involved throughout that duration. So I'm going to go back through those again very quickly for you. What problem are you trying to solve? What is the value of solving that project? What are you explicitly solving and not solving to scope? Who needs to be involved? How long is it going to take? And what do you need in terms of resources to solve it? Now, in all cases, it was expected that the thinking behind this was solid and defensible. But leadership, when they were evaluating all these charter lights against each other, because again, the objective is to have this for every project so you can look in a standardized way at every single opportunity. We looked for directionally correct, not surgically accurate in the figures. This meant that as someone advocating for a project, you were not anchored to the initial budget number that you put forward, but you were expected to be able to explain that number and defend the projection, defend your thinking, as well as be prepared to defend any subsequent modifications that you might make if that project is approved. And as it progressed, the budget changed up or down, you would need to be able to defend that and identify what changed that drove that change in your projection. So in other words, some people think, okay, well, couldn't you just sandbag on budget or overpromise on schedule to kind of get your project through this hurdle? And that might seem tempting to advance a pet project, but the reality was it was unlikely to pass muster once these questions were asked. And frankly, someone gaming this process to advance their own personal pet project, that's an edge case, and it really shouldn't consume too much concern as you put these processes together. Now, what is important and why I want to talk about it today is just how well this short and specific and simple tool helped us to facilitate the process for everybody involved. It brought together the people who were advocating for the potential projects, and it brought together those people who are charged with making the best decisions among the potential projects being presented, and it gave everybody common language. Everyone knew when that charter light came in what it would look like, what it would include, and how then you could compare that against other potential opportunities. And for agribusinesses that are looking for ways to simultaneously simplify their strategy execution process and are thinking about things like the requirements and criteria model, but they actually want to see movement, meaning it's great to talk about that model, but we want to see movement and progress, leveraging a charter light could really be what you're looking for. So let's recap what we talked about today. We talked briefly about the requirements and criteria model and how and why I feel it presents a significant opportunity to simplify and accelerate agribusiness strategy execution. Again, if you missed episode 61, I encourage you to go back and check that out. We talked about the fact that you will still face the inevitable challenge of how do you ultimately make the decision about which projects to pursue or not pursue, which to fund or not fund. What's the right mix for your company that optimizes the different people that have to be involved? We talked about how a conventional charter offers a lot of rigor to the process, but also brings rigidity, and sometimes is more than is necessary at that stage, and frankly can suffocate the effort. And we conversely talked about the 6 questions neatly answered in a single one-page chart of light and how that can be the missing piece to this overall challenge of taking a strategic vision for the company, articulated through a strategy, and then operationalized through the decision around what are we going to pursue with our finite limited resources to actually make progress in the business. That's all we have for today. I hope, as always, that this was relevant and valuable to you. A reminder to please like and subscribe to the Pacesetter Pod on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts. And if you really want to support the show, consider leaving us a review on your device right now. We really appreciate it, and it helps more people know that we're out here. And if anything we talked about today resonated with you, struck a chord, made you want to continue the conversation, you can always connect with me, Joe Mosier, on LinkedIn, or set up a call directly by visiting Mosier Consulting Group online at mosiercg.com. Thank you as always for tuning in, and hope you have a safe day.
This is thepodcastfactory.com.